right, hello everybody. This is Rio here. I help run the Hamilton Education's Humanities Department. So that means reading and writing for the SAT and the ACT. Today we are working on our sixth practice test from the College Board, test 396. I'm going to go through every single one of our reading and writing questions and discuss them at length, and also try to put them within the context of uh, how we consider these as question types as well. So we'll begin with question one in just a moment. Okay, so question one on module one is a vocab word and context question. We have it in our fill in the blank form, which make up the majority of the word and context. Probably 2/3 to 3/4 of word and context questions are in this format. What we're going to want to look for is a synonym or antonym, something in the text that clarifies our language, because I think several of these, particularly A and B, fit the kind of vibe of the passage, right? They sound good in there. A cordially feminist mode, cordially being kind of like pleasant or polite, doesn't really make sense. And an inadvertently feminist mode of writing, when you read the context of the passage, doesn't really quite make sense, even if it does sound okay, meaning that it like in an inadvertently feminist mode would mean that it's like feminist on accident. Okay. So a prudently feminist mode and an overtly feminist mode both kind of sound okay and sort of fit the logic of some of the passage, meaning that, you know, writing is being more feminist. To do it prudently is to do it with like a goal in mind, purposefully, sensibly. Prudential was the name of like a bank or something like that, because you want to be prudent or sensible with your money, prudent or sensible with how you act with those things. So, however, we have this right here, less deliberately signaled, right? Basically, we are seeing that up until the 70s, it was not deliberately signaled, but in the 70s, it does become deliberately signaled. So, signaled. So, what is the direct synonym with deliberately signaled or something being done deliberate? It's overt, right? Overt kind of sounds like over, which it kind of is related to, meaning it's clear. It's something that you can see over everything else. So, B, aligning with that synonym, is our best answer for one. All right, our second question here is a vocab word and context question. We have a passage in which you definitely need to read the whole thing to understand what word we want to use here, because many of these sound good in the context. They kind of are the right type of word if you were thinking about what is it just like feel fits the possible hypothetical situation here. But once you find the real situation, when you've done the reading, seeing as that this is a reading question, there's only one answer choice which fits. So what do all these mean? So precluding is the opposite of including. Okay. Epitomizing means to characterize. Redressing means basically to fix or like make amends for a problem. And exacerbating means to make something worse, right? Take something and make it bigger, usually a problem. So the all of these kind of sound okay. Exacerbating a long-standing trend of a problem, right? That could work. Fixing a problem could work. So you can make this problem worse, right? You can make it better. You could demonstrate it clearly. I think precluding is the only one that doesn't really fit the possible of that. So now we have to read the rest of the context, which says, scholars have recently begun to expand their focus to include the fastest growing cohort of social media users, senior citizens, which is so true. I don't know if my mom probably doesn't qualify as a senior citizen by any means yet, but boy, is she on Facebook. We all know that old people are really on Facebook. So Either way, in the context of this passage and for the goal of a vocab question, all right, we are saying that in acknowledgement of a long-standing trend of like a problem, the long-standing problem of overemphasizing teens and young adults, scholars have now kind of done the opposite of that, meaning that they've been focusing on seniors, right? So this is a fixing it situation, right? We are redressing, meaning we are fixing, we're going against, kind of making amends, setting right this long-standing problem. Okay. All these other ones are illogical. We're not making the problem worse by doing this. We're not demonstrating the problem by doing this. Okay. So the word redressing sounds like it has something to do with putting your clothes on again. Okay, this is a vocab word. If you're missing this question, one, you should not be missing it even if you do know, even if you don't know what redressing means, because all these other words don't fit. But if you're missing this because you don't know what redressing means and you feel uncomfortable choosing a word you don't know what it means, you got to be studying vocab, got to be learning words. All right, question 3 is a word and context vocab question. It's a little bit of a different form than our typical word and context question. About a quarter to a third of the word and context questions on the SAT seem to be in this format. It looks like it doesn't get much more than a third, doesn't get much less than a quarter per test. All right, so in this context, I always want us remembering two things. Okay, we're looking not just for what does it fit, right? But we also want it to mean the same thing. All right, it has to fit and it has to mean the same thing. Two factors we need to have, two parameters, right? So what does disputing every inch most clearly relate to? Now, you can have a dispute, which is kind of like an argument. You can dispute something, and you kind of like call it into question or maybe disapprove something. There are multiple answer choices here which fit the word disputing. You can dispute something or something can be disputed, meaning that there's resistance given to it, right? Like, I'm going to basically in this context is when you use dispute to provide resistance to something. All right. So what does it mean in this context though? They are every inch our passage is being disputed with all these things in the way. They're wagons, they're hand trucks, they're bursting baskets carried at an angle, steeply self-confident, right? All these things are basically in the way when on Sunday it is they are trying to go down a street which just has too many people in it, right? Therefore we have D. So we always want to think about fit and meaning. These maybe have the right meaning, but do they fit? Not really, right? Is anyone disproving them? No. Is anyone arguing about? Are they having an argument? No. It's just that this day, which apparently isn't a Sunday, honestly, because they weren't blue, they're standing in the way. So that is how we get D. All right, so question 4 is our final word and context question for the first module of this test 396. And it's a really good question because it's very, very logical. All right. We don't want to just take these answer choices and put them in there because many of them will sound or fit correctly. What we need to think is the logic. All right, so notice this subordinating concession word here, while. This means that this claim of this sentence, which will be clarified by the word there, that's the most important word in this sentence, is going to be kind of like contested by here, by this second. So the second claim is that it is indisputable that his location in the Muslim-ruled area of what is now Spain, so him being in like the Granada area, meant that his works were primarily available thousands of miles west of that era's center of Islamic thought, which is 1100. There's no cars, there's no planes, there's no trains. Trains being probably the most efficient, right? There's no other way, there's no way of getting his work to the center of the Islamic world very efficiently or easily. So why is our answer D? When we put it in, when we think about the logic of this here, what we are trying to say is that while something about him being noteworthy or read or what have you far away from where he lives, we have to admit that he was far away and he was provincial. Okay. So now this undermined part is really important as well. So while recent scholarship has undermined claims that he was inconsequential, he was very far away. So inconsequential means unimportant. It's a very extreme word. To say something is inconsequential is to say that it doesn't matter, right? Is there anything that points towards controversial in this sentence here, or in this clause here? No. Antagonistic in this clause? No. Imitated by? No. All right. So even if all these other answer choices can kind of fit in terms of they sound good in that first dependent clause, the first dependent clause cannot determine what the correct answer is here. It is insufficient on its own. What we need to do is put it in with the context of the rest of this passage, and then it becomes clear that it must be D. So question 5 here is a reading question. It's asking about the function of the underlined sentence in the text as a whole. All right. We always have to make sure that when we're looking at the function of the underlined text, we're looking at the rest of the text. So we see that he's going through a transformation, and then he ends up in a different stylistic place. So how did this transformation happen? What was the transformation? Well, that's what we get in this underlined sentence. So A aligns that perfectly, right? It says that he went from this to this, right? So this here, we're not really learning about his artistic influences until here, right? We're not really getting this personal life aspect. And then we are not seeing any calling into question. So that's why we can go with it. Okay, so 6 is a purpose question. Okay, it's a reading question asking about the purpose of the text. All right, so we have to go based off the text, but we always are looking for kind of a thesis statement, right? So our thesis here comes at the end. She, despite her experience, she never takes for granted this because she had done a tremendous amount of preparation, right? This is sort of a, we're setting ourselves up to think that this is about spontaneity, but really it's about preparation. Okay, so we're not really learning. So we get details about her music, but we don't get which pieces she will perform. We're not talking about how she chooses what she wants to do. Nor are we talking anything about comfort, right? Now, finally, D is a pretty good distractor here, right? Because the unique way that Eingereck approaches music is pretty good. And this here is an interesting part because it does say she's trying to counter it as if for the first time, right? But that as if is really important because that means it's not, in fact, for the first time. So the only one which has nothing wrong with it is B, which says that it looks effortless, right there. But in fact, she has a tremendous amount of preparation. All right, question 7 here is one of the best questions on the SAT. Amazing question, right? You are probably struggling with this. If you're watching this video, you missed the question, I'm presuming. You're probably struggling with this because this is an unfamiliar read for you, right? It's written in 1855, and it has some clear vocabulary in here, right? Evinced, Okay, Braveheart, a daredevil upon a pitch, right? This here is kind of syntactically weird. His employer proving false to the contract in the matter of the land, and there being no law in the country to force him to fulfill it, Israel was obliged to look around for other means of livelihood than clearing out a farm for himself in the wilderness, right? So obliged meaning forced, he must, because employer proving false, which was, what was the contract? That he would receive as wages for his work 200 acres of land in New Hampshire. So what's the situation here if you didn't understand it? Well, one, you should reread it and try to come to a consensus. But what happens is Israel Potter is a guy, young man. He works for an employer. The employer says, I'll pay you by giving you 200 acres of land. And then the employer doesn't give it to him. So Israel has to find other work. Why then did this happen? Well, because Israel, no matter how good he is, right, he's kind of a daredevil in certain situations and brave. He has events, which meaning he's demonstrated a singular patience and mildness. So with his patience and mildness, he isn't going and murdering the man who didn't pay him for 3 months of work. He seems to have accepted it and just moved on. All right, so B is our correct answer if you can understand and read this passage, simply put, right? If not for a certain aspect of his character, kind of his mildness and patience, he might not have been as easily thwarted in his ambition to establish a farm. Now, we don't really know exactly about, this ambition, but he seems to have thought, I want to do this work because I want to clear a farm for myself out in the wilderness of New Hampshire. And he was thwarted in that he was lied to. So his ambition or his goal was pushed aside. It was made impossible, right? His aspiration was extinguished. Okay. These other answer choices just don't make sense. Where does it show him treasuring this characteristic? Nowhere. Are they talking about the labor to run a farm? No, right? Do they talk about others avoiding courageous acts? No, right? These answer choices don't really make sense. So B is correct. But if you're missing this, you're probably just not reading texts like this enough. So that's one thing we try to do in our classes, do in our tutoring, is we try to show you longer passages that are of this style so you can become familiar with the language and the logic of this style of writing so you can attack a question like this and not have it thwart you in the same way Israel Potter was thwarted by his evil boss. All right, 8, we have a cross-text connections question. I'll admit that this is usually a very difficult question type for students, but in my opinion, this is a pretty straightforward, easy version of this question type than I've seen on other tests. So if this particular question bothered you, you should definitely go and take other practice tests, and you should consider watching the videos for the other question tests, the other practice tests as well, watching the test review video for the cross-text connections questions on those. So what is the claim here? It's a very extreme one. It seems like it was written by a student, right? The show is stuck in the past with an old-fashioned story and references, so it should no longer be produced. Extreme distractor. Whereas, it's not a distractor, it's not an answer choice, but it's very extreme. Text 2 says something else. Yes, it is outdated, but it should be kept because it's a holiday favorite and provides substantial income for some dance companies. So text 2 is kind of agreeing with the old-fashioned outdatedness, but disagrees with this claim. So our answer choice, when it asks, how would the author of text 2 most likely respond to the underlined claim? He already kind of did respond to it, right? The author of text 2 already kind of made their claim. So what was that claim? That while it is outdated, we should not be getting rid of it, right? So, sorry, I scrolled up too far. Answer choice D does that perfectly, right? Instead of completely rejecting the show, like text 1 suggests, we should offer a revised version. Okay? Now, A, while they do say contemporary versions or contemporary audiences enjoy an updated version, it is not questioning the idea that it's stuck in the past. It agrees with that idea, right? It agrees that it's sort of outdated. Here, this is a totally wrong distractor, right? Because they're saying a lot of people go and it generates revenue. And then finally, this is a kind of too far inference, but it could be correct. But does this have anything to do with the claim made in text one anyways? No. D directly responds to the claim in text one and was in fact pretty much already stated by text two. So that's why we go with it. All right, so question 9 is a main idea question, right? Very related to a purpose question. We're trying to understand what is this passage saying? What's the main idea here? So we kind of have a social sciencey passage. Basically, this archaeologist is trying to figure out how did Paleolithic artists manage to paint in the pitch black caves? How did they get there? What did they do? So she eventually says, looks like there were 3 different types. And they all had a specific purpose, right? So the main idea needs to be the whole thing. It needs to be encapsulating. It cannot be just one thing that's true. So for example, an answer choice like A, which is a distractor, meaning it's wrong. It's really strong, right? It's really hard to get rid of because indeed, she does say, it seems like fireplaces were essential to the creators of Paleolithic cave art. But is that the main idea? Right? No, the main idea is that all had a specific purpose, right? So if this said fireplaces, animal fat lamps, and torches all were relevant, then it would be correct. But here it's just talking about the fireplaces. So this is like a true but irrelevant distractor, right? It's correct, but it doesn't go so far to answer the question. Now, B, this is something that's unsupported, right? We don't know for sure if they used it more than the other. They don't say if any of them are used more than the other. Then finally, C, this is just totally like out of left field. There's nothing that makes sense here. So our answer choice seemingly has to be D by omission. But then when we check it out, it makes sense, right? They tested these different light sources, right? They tested all 3, as they show. And they learned some details, right? So for instance, here's a detail. They, learn that torches are better than fat lamps. So that's why we go with D. All right, so this is question 10 here is a pretty straightforward command of evidence question, all right? We're being asked, which response from a survey would best support the researcher's explanation? So what is the researcher's explanation of Sam Hui's claim? Well, that finding items in a new layout causes you to move through more of the store, thus seeing more products and increasing the likelihood they'll buy a new item they didn't plan on purchasing. A says that directly. I went to find the cleaning supplies, but they weren't where they normally are. While looking around, I saw a notebook and decided to buy it too, right? That is exactly this. Now, B would refute that claim, right? By saying, I couldn't find it, so I didn't buy it. C connects to the claim up at the top, right? The obvious messaging of right here. But it doesn't connect to the blue part, which is what claim we're actually looking for, the explanation. And then D doesn't talk about a new layout. It just talks about the general layout being more important. All right. So A is the only one which aligns directly with the claims that are brought up by the researcher's explanation. The SAT loves to ask us questions about particular parts of a small passage, right? Asking about us about one claim when 2 or 3 claims might be made in a passage. We have to focus on the one claim that is asked. All right, question 11 is a textual command of evidence question, meaning we are looking for something which would support this claim right here. So what is the claim? Well, it is that these exhibitions showcase diverse media and the artists use diverse media and engage with different elements of the Black experience, right? So we just want to see diverse media. So one, we have to know what a diverse media is. We're not talking about, this is where vocab comes to play, even if this isn't a vocab question. We're not talking about, multiple different ethnic groups and genders being news broadcasters or writing articles or something like that. Media here is referring to different forms of art. This is a kind of a vocab question. So if you miss this, you might just not be understanding what media means, right? So in here, media, we hear one artistic medium is drawings, and then paintings and photographs and sculptures. And these are all different art medias, right? So that is perfect. Okay, that supports the claim, right? Which is that these art exhibitions showed art from different mediums. B is a difference, doesn't really make sense. C, again, it doesn't talk about the diversity of the media. And then D, while yes, we wanted to show something about how they're attesting to the Black experience, is there anything about the diversity of the media forms there? No, not whatsoever. A is thus our only answer choice, which works. Okay, so question 12 is a total misrepresentation of a study that was published back in 2006, I think. Maybe it was 2020, actually. So total misrepresentation, because again, the College Board are disgusting, horrible people. But regardless of this misrepresentation, we have to make sense of it on its own, right? So we do not think about the ideology that they are attempting to insinuate here. Anyways, when we look at it, we see that attentiveness scores, which is not the only cognitive thing. So this is kind of stupid science on the basis of the College Board, but they're stupid people. You'll see with no leave, right, the scores stay relatively stable if going down. With a short break, you go up significantly and then stabilize. With a long break, seems to always be going down, even if this comes before the break. So it's kind of a confounding variable. Either way, we are saying that longer leave time might not confer a greater cognitive benefit than shorter leave times do. Well, of course, it might not, because nothing can be confirmed in a study as horribly represented as this. All right, so what must our answer choice show? It must show that the longer break, which is the black bar, after the break, so the second and third trimesters are the only ones that, or not trimesters, second and third administrations of the tests are the only ones that matter, right? They're the only ones that are post-break. We need to show that the black bar in the second two does not exceed the lightest bar in those same two administrations. All right. So we only are looking at the second and third tests. All right. So C and D are good. B is a problem because it only is looking at the first test. And then A is looking at both as well. So we can get rid of C immediately for that reason. Now, what is A saying? We are adding a confounding variable here, which is those who took no leave, right? We cannot consider that variable because we are only considering these two parameters. So that is irrelevant here. With D, we are saying that 1 to 2 to 4 days leave provides better attentiveness than those who took no leave. Now, is that true? Yes, it is true. But again, in this instance, we are doing these two parameters. But what two must we look at? Only these two. So D is using the wrong parameters. So that gets us to C, which is that, let's check that it's true. This bar was higher in both instances than the black bar next to it in the second and third tests, meaning, okay, it looks like 2 to 4 days of leave gave a little bit more attentiveness than those who took leave of 1 to 5 weeks. Now, that 5-week may not have anything to do. I mean, it's just stupid, but that's our answer choice. So, see. Okay, so with question 13, I think this is first off, this is a command of evidence quantitative question, and I have some issues with it, honestly. It seems a little bit nonsensical. However, because it is saying energy expense of exploiting full speed, which would be this, may disfavor, make it not ideal, even in escape contexts, as evidenced by the fact that something. Now, it seems like the vast majority of lizards species use maximal speed when escaping, all right? However, because there are a few which don't use maximal speed while escaping, it seems like there is an argument that maybe not for every single lizard species is it ideal to use maximal speed while escaping. Now, even if the vast majority are up here, the question is asking, how do we support this claim, right? Well, we can support that claim, which I think is a silly claim, but we can still support it by pointing out that, look, there are 3 lizard species that would rather use 80 to 89%. There are 2 lizard species that rather use 70 to 79%. 1 species that would use 60 and 2 species that would use 50, right? So not all use an average of 100 to 90%. There are some which don't, which aligns with B, right? Now, A is just truly incorrect. There's no situation where most lizard species do about the most when escaping as when pursuing. Looks like most lizard species pursue at a lot lower of a speed than escaping. Now, C, even if it is true, does that support this claim? No, it actually undermines that claim. So C is true, but it undermines the claim. All right. And then finally, D, we don't really know this because less than 100% of their maximal speed could be all of these categories here. Finally, we're talking about pursuing prey when we should only be talking about escaping. So B is the only answer choice which is both correct and supports the claim present. That's why it must be the one that we choose. So the SAT is very funny, in my opinion. And here, question 14 is a great demonstration of that. We have a lot of very easy questions on this test, some which are almost insultingly easy. And then we see a question like 14, which is pretty difficult, I would say, right? So under normal atmospheric pressure, water molecules form a tetrahedral network that is stabilized by hydrogen bonds. Okay, that's our first step that we need to understand. Stable bonds in normal pressure. But in extreme pressure, these bonds are destabilized, and that compresses water structure. So structure, stable on normal pressure, high pressure, unstable and compressed. What happens then? Because it is compressed and destabilized, the water molecules permeate protein within organisms and impede crucial biological functions. Okay, so that's why most things can't be at such high pressure. However, deep sea organisms known as piezophiles have adapted to extreme pressure. Okay, maybe piezophiles or piezophiles, meaning pounds or feet. Studies have found a positive correlation. Okay, so positive correlation means that there's 2 graphs and one goes this way, right? One variable goes that way. As that variable goes that way, so does this variable, right? They go in the same direction. When one goes up, the other goes up. So they have found a positive correlation between the depths that they inhabit. So the deeper they go, the higher of a concentration of TMAO is present in them. Okay? Which has led to the hypothesis that TMAO, this is the most important thing we read here, TMAO reduces water's compressibility. All right, so if we've understood all this now, we can move to finding the evidence that most directly supports the hypothesis. So what kind of answer choice would we need? We would need one which says that in the presence of TMAO, with TMAO, compressibility of water is more stable, right? So compressibility is reduced, right? The compression of the water molecule is reduced because of an increased instability as caused by TMAO. Okay, so what answer choice aligns with that? Well, we see it perfectly in D. Looking at water's molecular structure, under high pressure, the bonds are more stable when TMAO is present than when it is not, right? So it is more like normal atmospheric pressure than it is under high pressure with TMAO present. Okay? So C is an opposite distractor. That means as TMAO goes up, compression of water goes up. But we want to show the opposite, right? We want to show that compression goes down because stability increases. As stability goes up, compression goes down. So a positive correlation between stability and TMAO would be okay. But a positive correlation between compression of water molecules and TMAO, that's the opposite. All right, looking at B, we see that TMAO molecules retain their shape even as pressure increases. But is our consideration about TMAO molecular structure? No. We need H2O, water's molecular structure. So B is not there. Now, finally, water molecules are impervious. What does impervious mean? It means unaffected by, which is already a clear distractor. Water molecules should not be unaffected by TMAO because really we're trying to say water molecules are affected by TMAO, right? With the presence of this particular molecule or this compound, excuse me, water molecules would thereby be more stable, less compressed, meaning there is an impact of TMAO. Maybe I should stop calling it TMAO on water molecules. Okay. A says there is no impact of TMAO on water molecules, which clarifies that A is wrong as well. So the only answer choice which states that there is a relationship between this compound, TMAO, and water molecules that increases the stability of water molecules, thereby reducing the compression of those water molecules, and finally reducing the impact of those water molecules permeating proteins and impeding biological functions, is D. All right, now, that's a tricky one. You have to really think logically, but that's what we're being asked here, right? To be logical. I think this is a brilliant question. It's a really strong, good question. Smart students should get this right. So if you're missing a question like this, I'm presuming you might just be giving up too early. We're not following the logic all the way through. Okay, so 15 is a logical completion question, meaning actually it's an inference question, all right? So we need to understand the logic of this passage and then make a safe inference based off of that logic. So T. navigans, a pterosaur, is unlike other pterosaurs, right? So other pterosaurs are mainly flyers. But this pterosaur has long hind legs, short wings, and an unusually long neck, which, combined with its large head, would have made flight difficult and walking upright comfortable. So it is therefore likely, right, that they probably, if it seems like flying is impossible and walking is comfortable, it's probably that they walk and don't fly. Now, why would that be more than what was previously thought? Well, previously, it was presumed that they mainly flew like other pterosaurs. But based off of this evidence of the complete skeleton, it would suggest that, in fact, D, they walk more, right? A is an opposite distractor, right? It's not other pterosaur species that had oversized head crests. It is the T. navigans. B, it says that they have shorter wings. So it's another opposite distractor. And then finally, C is just irrelevant. There's nowhere that says that they have smaller heads than they expected. So D is the only one here. I think this is pretty straightforward, but after as brutal of a question as 14, right, your focus might be waning a little bit. You might be eager to get into those maybe easier grammar questions if you've been studying a lot. And you might just not give this the time it requires or is due, or the effort or intensity or energy. All of those things might combine for a relatively short question like 15 to be difficult. And with that, we'll move into the grammar portion of this first module. All right, so here we are on the kind of writing section of Module 1, first starting with a very simple punctuation question, probably the easiest punctuation question I have seen on a College Board SAT. Our first sentence is finished. Okay, we move on to the second. Her innovative poems popularized the use of Jamaican Creole in literature. All right. There is no need for any other punctuation here, right? A semicolon would mean both sides of the semicolon need to stand on their own as an independent clause. Could be a sentence, not there, right? D with a colon, it needs to be the language to the left of the colon needs to be independent clause. Not the case. Then finally, B, that comma isn't accomplishing anything, right? Commas either create lists, they create complex sentences by separating dependent and independent clauses. I mean, they do a bunch of things, but there's nothing that would accomplish there. So it's just C, and you should get that. If you're missing this, you're moving way too quickly, or you really need to study the most basic fundamental things. All right, 17 here on Module 1 is one of the classic SAT questions. This is about this. I would use this as an example for every student. Okay, this is a great question, right? So answer is D here, reveal. Why is that? Well, it's because our subject is plural, right? Our subject is plural, but it is very unclear where the subject is, right? Because we have this long, okay, that line is a little too big here. We have this long non-essential phrase that makes it difficult to find where our actual subject is, which is such quotidian objects. So, it would be really, if you chose C, okay, be really easy to choose C thinking that his naturalism reveals the daily minutiae of a 17th century Dutch household. But it is not his naturalism that reveals this. It is the quotidian objects, meaning the day-to-day objects, that reveal it. All right. So objects is our subject. In the plural, we conjugate it, our verb, reveal, into the proper time, into the proper number. All right. Now, B has the wrong number, but also revealed doesn't work because this artwork still exists. Though Vermeer painted it in the 1600s, it still reveals the daily minutiae, right? It is still in existence, so it's present. And then A also is the wrong number anyways, but was revealing means that it would have stopped revealing. It continues to reveal, right? So art still exists. It still does the thing. And there's multiple aspects of the art, the objects that do reveal the minutia. So answer choice D. All right, 18, like 17, is another really classic SAT question where if you are not reading this whole thing, or you are kind of putting yourself in that situation, You will get this wrong. I am sure many people chose B because they didn't read past this comma, or they didn't read up to that comma and thought that this whole part was just one early sentence, right? Because it sounds pretty good. Jamaican British artist Willard Wigan is known for his remarkable microsculptures. Creations so small they are best viewed through a microscope. If that comma was a period, right, answer choice should be B. But I reiterate, is this comma a period? No, it is a comma, which is why then B is incorrect, right? We actually have a sentence that says, creations so small they are best viewed through a microscope. Wigan's sculptures are made from tiny natural materials, such as spiderweb strands. Okay, that is the proper context because of that comma, right? That comma clarifies that we are starting with a dependent clause into an independent clause, meaning we have a period before the first independent clause. Jamaican British artist Willard Wigan is known for his remarkable microsculptures. That's perfectly capable of standing on its own, so it can be an independent clause. If you're not reading this whole passage, you will get this wrong. If you got this wrong, you didn't read the whole passage. That's on you, right? You have, I don't know. You maybe think too highly of your own skills, or you think you're taking the College Board at their word. But remember, the College Board is evil. These are evil little people, freaky, right? Never take them at their word. Okay, you remember that they're always trying to trick you. That's how we get to see. All right, so question 19 is a pretty funny classic SAT type question because it does something that it tests something that they love to test, which are these bizarre non-rules that students come to believe, usually through their parents, are rules of grammar or English. So I've had a lot of students tell me that they don't think a sentence can start with the word because. Oh, a sentence cannot start with the word because, right? That is not a grammatical rule, okay? There's nothing that says that. That is not the case whatsoever. Because can come anywhere because it is a subordinating term, meaning it causes a dependent clause. An independent clause can come at the beginning of a sentence so long as an independent clause follows it, right? So why is our answer choice B? Well, this whole thing here needs to stand on its own to describe our answer choice, our first previous sentence before it. Array diagram reveals how this works. That's an independent clause. Because we use the word this doesn't make it not an independent clause, right? It's basically like a pronoun, kind of, for talking about the pinhole camera. Now, then we get a description. Because the hole's small size restricts light to a single ray, all light passing through the hole can only arrive at a single destination, eliminating diffraction and ensuring a clear image. Okay, that is all on its own. That's what we call a complex sentence with dependent and independent clauses. Right, so A is a run-on. C, we change the subject, as does D. So B is perfect. All right, so question 20 is our first transitions question on the test here. We always want to think about what category of transition are we using for a question. We don't want to just take our answer choices and plug them in. That's a surefire way to make a mistake, even if you're really smart. All right. So we want to think, what sort of category do I want here? We want a pivot category. So these two scientists say we shouldn't use the term life. On the contrary, we should use a different word, LYFE, to show that there are distinctions between what we might see as life on other planets. All right. So We want a pivoting word, and the only pivot transition here is instead, right? So that's why we go with instead. That is why it's the correct answer. There is like a location. Regardless is incorrect, weird concession, and previously doesn't work, right? So instead is the only one that provides that direct contrast, which is perfect here, right? That's why we go with D. So for transitions, I always want us thinking about what category of transition fits in a place as opposed to what word sounds good here, right? Nevertheless, and for example, I would say sound okay in this. But when we think about what sort of transition do we want, today is the only one that really works. Why? Well, we're looking for time. Okay, we see time is already there. Before, it was only able to. Here we want something like now, right? You put now there, it's a time word, works. Which of our answer choices is also a time transition? Today. So study your categories sheet for transitions if you're missing a question like this, and make sure you're using the right approach. All right, 22, we have a transitions question, okay? In this case, on the other hand works because on the other hand is adding additional information, right? We're always looking for what kind of category do we want here. So we're basically saying option A is this. Additionally, option B is this, right? For instance, is to basically affirm something, right? That's kind of like an emphasis or exemplify. And summary is a summary. And in other words, restates something, right? So this isn't restating, this is additional. It's new information, right? So as always, when you're looking at these questions, try to think about what category of transition fits, and that should lead you to the right answer choice. All right, so for a transitions question like 23, we always want to be thinking about what category of transition works here. For example, is an exemplifier or emphasis transition. Okay, it means that the claim has to be exactly the same, but we're adding a new claim. Okay, by adding a new claim, by expanding what we use KeepBoost for, we are adding information. And in addition is the most classic adding information transition there is. In other words, is a way of saying something, the same topic in a new form, right? So we had to say, in other words, it'd be like, in other words, they had the internet before the internet or something like that. And as a result, is cause and effect, but this does not cause our second claim. So we have a new additional information, so we use in addition. All right, so this one's kind of interesting because then the correct answer is typically used as a time category transition. But in this case, it's actually used as a cause and effect transition. When it's embedded like this, it's cause and effect. If you were to have put this at the beginning and changed it to thus, it would be working exactly the same. So we need something that's cause and effect. Is however cause and effect? No. However is contrast. Is moreover cause and effect? No, by no means. Moreover is additional information. Is for example cause and effect? No, it's emphasis or exemplify. The only word which is in our cause and effect category is the word then. If you're missing a question like this, make sure you're really reading the logic of the passage. If you didn't read the logic of this passage, it becomes much, much harder. Secondly, make sure you're thinking about what kind of category of transition do I want to put here within the context, and remember that certain words can have different meanings in different contexts, like the word then. It can be a time thing or a cause and effect. All right, so we are on a rhetorical synthesis question here, and we always want to look and make sure we want to do this. Okay, so we want to emphasize Janaki Ammal's achievement. So according to the passage, what is her achievement? That she succeeded in creating sugarcane hybrids well suited to India's climate by crossing them. Okay, so our answer choice must have this in it, and if it doesn't, it's not correct, right? So the correct answer is A, because we see there's the significance of the achievement, and this is how she did it, right? Perfect. See what's wrong with the other ones, okay? With B, do we have this parameter? No. With C, do we have this parameter? What she did? No. And now D, even though it explains her achievement, where is the significance? Why is it important? Basically, does it have this final parameter? No. That is why A is correct. All right, so we have a rhetorical synthesis question here on 26. That means we need to emphasize a similarity. All right, so let's find the similarity in the text. All right, so we see in this one, there are two African-American figures. We have two African-American figures, okay? It is the opposite, right? One has sharply in many ways. One has sharply defined features. One has round and distinct features. Then there are some similarities too, where maybe they embrace each other, right? Whereas this one, they actually aren't touching, so maybe that's actually a difference. Okay. The biggest thing is that they both are kind of supporting each other. Right? We see a close supportive relationship and support, and they're both African American. So, A shows the support, but do we have equality here? Not clearly. And also B shows the support, but we also have the fact that they're African American. So it is better, it has closer to that. This doesn't show any similarity, and this shows difference, okay? Finally, answer choice A only talks about one artwork, right? We have students aspire, but where's recognition in there? Not present. So B is the only one that gives us both artworks and how they compare. All right, so question 27 is a rhetorical synthesis question. We are looking for a generalization about materials used in Dow replicas. We're talking about specifically, so we want to make sure we're focusing on that. So most of the materials are traditional, but there is some modern mixed in, as shown by the detail of coconut palm fiber. All right, so generally we want to say something along the lines of most of the materials are traditional, just like coconut palm fiber, but we do use modern materials in the replicas. C does this perfectly, right? We talk about there are mostly traditional, but there are some modern materials. Okay. A is too specific. It only talks about a detail, right? Where's the generalization of that? B is a generalization about the Dow itself, not about Dow replicas, like we're looking for. And then finally, D just says that they build replicas, but do they show how? No. So the best, clearest answer here that does both our parameters and makes a generalization is C. And with that, we come to the end of our first module. All right, so question 1 here on module 2 is a word and context question. I don't want us just plugging in our answer choices and seeing which one sounds best. I want us thinking, what kind of word do we want there? So we see here that she's displaying her work in public outdoors. Before now, has them displayed in museums in the United States and abroad. So what's most similar to that would be featured. All right. Recommended is a pretty good wrong answer choice in terms of it's compelling because the works being recommended in museums while initially being murals kind of makes sense, except we want to see that the logic of this sentence is saying, while they once were only displayed outside, now they are displayed everywhere. So featured fits as displayed. It's kind of a synonym. It works in the same way in this answer choice, which is why we can go with it for number 1. All right, number two is another word and context question. I think this one is really pretty dang clear. We are basically saying whether small or large, she is something by direct experience, drawing from memories of her childhood in Texas or details of her current surroundings in California. I mean, influenced by or inspired by is the word that I would come up with to put there. And inspired by is one of our answer choices, right? None of these really make sense in the context. This is one of the easiest word and context questions I've seen on the tests. So you got this wrong. You're moving too quickly. You're doing some sort of approach thing wrong. You're coming at the question wrong if you're missing this one because the vocab terms are really easy and the logic of this passage is really straightforward. So slow down or something if you're missing this one. I'm expecting all of us to get it correct, really. All right, question 3, we really have a logic question here. It is a word and context question, certainly. However, we have a pretty clear through line to where we want to go. All right, we have the logic here, this but, it's a coordinating conjunction, but it's a pivot word. It's not a transition exactly, but it's functioning as one, right? While so-and-so believes X, or many believe X, Bastos and her team showed that they were indeed deliberate, right? So we're looking for an opposite of deliberate here. The logic of this passage suggests we need the opposite of deliberate. What is the opposite of deliberate? Accidental. Now, this is a really good example of how the vocab questions on the test, the answer choices aren't the only words we want to know, right? We need to know deliberate as a vocab term as well here, but this is a pretty straightforward one, right? Now, intriguing kind of sounds good in there, but is intriguing the opposite of deliberate? No. Obvious is obviously a opposite distractor here, and observable doesn't really fit either, though observable, right, might be what is being done. It might be true that they are observable. Is it the opposite of deliberate? No, it is not. So that's where we can go with accidental. All right, so question 4, you might be worried about tense for this one, all right? But remember, the answer choices you're going to be seeing here, I mean, they're not going to give you one that like is incorrect because of grammar, right? They're going to give you them incorrect because of what they mean and the logic of this passage. So manifest means present, okay? Now, this is a good word for them to use because it is a word that a lot of people are using or have used in the last couple of years on the internet, talking about manifesting something and how, I mean, you know, it's used really kind of like as like some weird kind of astrology, like if you believe in something, it's gonna happen thing. But that's not what manifest means. When something is manifest, right, it means it is shown or present. It's available to be seen, right? So if someone is you'll hear it in doctor terminology sometimes, like patient arrived into the emergency room, manifesting signs of you know, intestinal blockage or whatever, right? Like that means showing it. There's present signs of something. So they're arguing that industrialization or his repudiation of industrialization is present or shown by additions use of handmade materials, intricate ornamentation representative of medieval manuscripts. And this, it's meaning showing, right? It means present or demonstrable. Insensible, while industrialization is insensible, we have to find this word repudiation. Okay, so remember, it's not only the answer choices that determine a vocab question. Repudiation is a word we need to know for this vocab question, right? Scrutinize. Scrutinized means to like deeply consider something. Usually a little bit of like a skeptical tone to it. Is his repudiation of this scrutinized by him doing it? No, it's epitomized by him doing it, right? Demonstrated by it, which is what manifest means. Finally, complicated by, that would have to repudiate his repudiation. So while industrialization might be complicated by his works, his repudiation of industrialization is not, right? So the only answer choice that shows like demonstrated or present or what have you is manifest, right? Which doesn't mean manifested like I manifested I get into Harvard and then I did. Right? All right, so for B, I just want to point out where we're getting the logic here. So we're saying that the inventor of Kevlar, Stephanie Kwolek, will long be remembered for what she did, while Mary Angell Pennington is going to be kind of the opposite, which we see with this word but here. So what we want is a word here to say something along the lines of maybe unclear or unheralded or forgotten than that of Stephanie Kwolek. Okay. And we don't have forgotten. We don't have anything like that, but we do have tentative. Okay. When something is tentative, it means it's kind of iffy or shaky. You'll hear people say like, yeah, like tentatively I'm down for that, or like, yeah, I can meet with you. I can schedule a tentative meeting with you for 6 p.m. on a Thursday, but I have to confirm with my manager at first that I don't have any other meetings going on. Okay, so tentative means that it's not strong, it's not fully confirmed, it might not be the clearest. Okay, permanent, well, nothing is permanent, but we're not talking about permanence, right? We're talking about stature. So tentative is more about stature. And also it's vice versa, right? So we're looking for an opposite logic. While Kwolek might be permanent, Pennington is the opposite. Warranted would say that we should believe in Pennington more because she helped advance home refrigeration than Kwolek, who made Kevlar. And honestly, that's an opinion piece there, right? There's nothing that suggests that the author believes that Pennington is more warranted. Kind of baggage there. I mean, clearly refrigeration is more important than Kevlar. Clearly, right? We don't have fridges. What are we doing? Using ice from the Kennebec River. But that's your own opinion, right? Not the opinion of the passage. And then prominent is another opposite distractor, right? She is less prominent, not more prominent, because this other person is really prominent, right? We need the opposite of that because of the word but. So that's why we can go with tentative and finish the word and context vocab questions for this test. All right, so question 6 here is a main purpose question. So we have a literary text, meaning we need to be focused on character and tone, right? So what do we see here? Well, she had a plan about reading all the books in the world. And she was reading a book a day in alphabetical order and reading even the boring ones. She is just reading a lot. So yeah, that's really it. This is a really straightforward question for the SAT, especially when we see literature. On Module 1, we've definitely seen some much harder questions regarding literature, like the one which came from Herman Melville, but this is really straightforward, and we pretty clearly see that it's C. What's wrong in B? Is there any other activities? Nope. Do we to show that this is unusual? Even if you think it's unusual, is unusual in the text? No. So if you chose A, that's a baggage distractor, right? You're saying, oh, that seems unusual to me. Do they say it's unusual here? No. And then finally, do they describe a particular book? No. So our only answer choice that we can go with that makes sense here is C. And with that, we move on. All right, so question 7 here, we have a function question. So one thing I always want us to remember is we need to read the whole passage to understand what the function of something is. We can't look at just the underlined portion and try to make sense of its meaning. We have to see everything else. So we see everything else, and we learned that in medieval Europe, those who, there's a stereotype of it being dirty and stinky, but in fact, it was a little bit more hygienic than expected. And in fact, everyone was typically taking baths. However, these baths, so full immersion and steams baths, were only in town. Those amenities were not in the broader place. So not everybody had these public bathhouses. C shows that perfectly, right? So the function of this is basically to say, to take a claim and offer a concession towards it, which is while, and then introduce a new claim, or kind of like qualified claim, which is that bathing is still commonplace even outside of the town. We're not learning at all about why this person wanted to study this. There are other studies. We don't see earlier historical studies, right? We see just a limitation of maybe stereotype, but not other stories or historians. And here it's that steam baths were more popular with maybe perhaps working class or something like that. I don't know if that exists in the olden days of European towns, the working class, but A is best there. So, or A doesn't work there because we're not comparing rural to urban on steam baths. We're comparing rural to urban or rural to urban in terms of steam and real baths versus rivers and lakes. So our answer is C. So 8 is kind of a ridiculous passage. The College Board, of course, is engaging in some sort of propaganda here, but regardless, we need to understand the passage in terms of how it answers a question on the SAT. So whether Juan Herrera is saying anything worthy of note is up for debate. However, what we're looking to do is just say, what is the function of the underlined portion in the text as a whole? Meaning we must know the whole thing. So C is correct because it is saying that the common is to focus on outspoken and militant figures in the movement. And doing so, it makes the low-profile neighborhood institutions and progress projects and these sort of things less visible by focusing on that. So that is why we would say that C is correct. It isn't summarizing it this word here is what makes D incorrect, right? Doing that doesn't dispute the effectiveness of neighborhood institutions. So it says it's overemphasized, etc., but do they say that their own political orientations at all? No. If you're selecting that, you're probably watching too much YouTube. You're kind of dumb. Not because you selected this answer choice. I'm totally kidding, right? You're probably selecting this out of a baggage distractor, though, right? Thinking about what the remember, a baggage distractor is a distractor in which we're taking our own kind of personal influences or personal insights that we've learned from class or other places and bringing it in here. You may be of the mistaken notion that, the political orientations of scholars would lead us to look for militant, outspoken figures, but that is not identified in the text. And therefore, we cannot select it because you have to only go based off of the text, which might be difficult for you. And if you selected A, it is, has it been reevaluated? It doesn't seem as so. So C is the only answer choice where nothing is incorrect. All right, so question 9 is a main idea question that is actually pretty difficult. We have to make sense of a few things and really understand jargon that is present. Okay, so a particular researcher identified a negative correlation. So a negative correlation is when one thing goes up, another thing goes down, right? So between the share of developing countries' economies derived from natural resource extraction and those countries' receipts of foreign investment. Right. So the more a developing country has their economy derived from natural resource extraction, the lower foreign investment received from that country. Now, there's something insidious here in this writing by the college board because they ignore many of the actual common explanations for this in order to offer something that they expect you to kind of uncritically engage with. But whatever, okay, we just have to consider the claim of this passage. So what is the claim? Although it seems counterintuitive, right? Counterintuitive meaning you would think that the more natural resources a country has, the more foreign investment they would have. The natural resource boom and bust cycle can lead to foreign investors being wary of that uncertainty, right? So something about the way natural resource industries go up and down and are kind of unpredictable makes foreign investors uncomfortable or overly wary of investing in that country because they're worried that the boom and bust will impact it. Now, somebody, that's totally a guess at an explanation, right? No more founded in science than the idea that like your health is determined by humors in your body, so we should, do a bloodletting to try to, restore the good humors. But that's much of economics as somebody who got an econ degree. It's the same thing. So either way, what best states this main idea that despite what you might expect, there is low investment in countries with high natural resource extraction because perhaps those natural resource extraction methods or focus leads to an instability that investors don't like, right? So C shows that exactly, okay? Although one might expect this, the opposite happens because reliance on natural resources can lead to unattractive conditions for investors, all right? Now, again, likely not the explanation. This is really ridiculous, but according to the text, that's all we can go off of, right? We're not considering this as the truth. We don't want to do a baggage distractor. So here we have some others that are just like are improperly explained, right? So up till here, that makes sense, right? But from this point forward, is this supported in the text? Not whatsoever, right? So not in the text, not supported. It's reasonable, but it's unsupported. Okay. Now, developing countries tend to become less dependent as, right? This is an analysis that is not presented in the passage, which leads to another incorrect, right? It's not based off of the text. It's a baggage distractor on this one, okay? And then finally, here we see a claim that is reasonable, but again, it's unsupported, right? Where are we talking about initial investments? Not nowhere in specific, okay? So C is the only one that refers specifically to the claims made in the passage. It goes solely based off the text and is has nothing wrong with it, which is why we would go with C. All right, so 10 is a really good question, honestly. This is a good inference question, asking us to make a sensible, safe inference based off of information from a text. All right. So we had soil moved from higher to lower where the air was warmer, and we see that nutrient cycling was accelerated. Now, there could have been many reasons why nutrient cycling was accelerated, right? It could be that new microorganisms were there, right? Or it could be that different ratios of microorganisms happened, right? Maybe some couldn't handle the warmer weather and other ones could, and those ones are more efficient or something like that. There are all these possible explanations until you see what is crucial, right? Microorganism community composition was unchanged, allowing them to attribute this acceleration to increases in their just activity, right? So because we could rule out that it was unchanged, or because we could confirm that it was unchanged, right? Why is that important? Well, it rules out everything else other than that. They just got more active. There were the same number of them. There were the same composition of them. Everything was the same, except they just were doing more. They just were more active about it, right? So, D is not correct because the microorganisms comprising the community is actually not what causes it. B is probably a baggage distractor, right? If you're worried about, climate change and temperature change, you might say, increasingly as temperature increases going higher, we will see new activity changing. But that's not what they clarify here, right? This is strictly from the scientific perspective of just how this experiment worked. We're not looking at broader conclusions within this text. And then finally, A, this is true, but not based off of this conclusion. So yes, nutrient cycling was accelerated in the transplanted cores. But the caveat or the crucial unchanged composition thing didn't reveal A. A was already revealed just by the fact that it went up. That was kind of a given, right? What was so important about the changing composition being unchanged by the microorganism composition being the same? What's important about that is that, well, we can attribute A, which is the finding, to just activity, the finding present in C, right? So A is ultimately doesn't go far enough. It doesn't refer to what was actually asked, though it is correct. So it's true but irrelevant. All right, so 11 is a really smart, pretty interesting command of evidence question based on the text, okay? So we are asking, what would they agree about with the presence of atmospheric ammonia? All right, so what they are saying is that ammonia can serve as a biosignature, meaning if you have ammonia in the atmosphere, it's likely that there's life, with the following caveat. It must be on rocky planets, such as Earth, because on a rocky planet, ammonia in the atmosphere couldn't be detectable without the absence of biological activity. However, they do think that pressure and temperature can be high enough to get ammonia on other planets if those other planets aren't rocky. Okay, other planets that look like Neptune, right? In that they are smaller than Neptune, but they have the same atmosphere. So only on rocky planets would ammonia be a biosignature, is what they're saying. So we would probably find ammonia on Earth's, but we couldn't say that ammonia present in a place like a mini Neptune would give away life. So C says that perfectly, right? It should be treated as a biosignature if detected in the atmosphere of a rocky planet, but not in a mini Neptune. All right. Here, we don't know if a mini Neptune is more common than a rocky planet, right? This is like confounding variables for A. B, now, this is kind of the opposite, right? I mean, we have no idea, right? These are variables that were not brought up or discussed in the text. And then finally, D, this is clearly not correct, right? That's the opposite of what is said in the passage. So we can only resolve to C. All right, 12 is a command of evidence question in the form of a poem. All right, these are kind of the weirder ones. This is one of the weirder question types on the SAT, but we need to know how to navigate it. right? So we need to see two things in our answer choice. We need to see contradictory feelings, meaning maybe positive and negative emotions. And we also need to see the experience of a spring day, sights and sounds. All right, so we need sights and sounds, and we need contradictory feelings. No feelings explicitly present in A. B, we see there's pleasure, but do we see anything other than pleasure? No. C, we see again pleasure, but we don't see any other feelings. No. But with D, we see a sweet mood with pleasant thoughts, but also sad thoughts. All right. Now, that gets to the contradictory feelings. We also need to show that it has sight and sound. Okay, but he hears many things and reclines. All right. So it has the like sensory details that we need. So sense is checked, and it has the contradictory feelings that we need. So that is checked, which leads us to say that it has the two parameters, and none of the other answer choices do. So it must be correct. All right, so 13 has a subtle irony as a question that isn't really relevant, but it's kind of interesting. Okay, so we learn about placebos and how you normally get a placebo as a control, and then a medical, like a real medicine, to which the placebo is connected to see, well, you know, are we improving if we're taking a medication or not compared to the placebo? Typically, we don't find out that they're receiving a placebo. However, in this case, they let the person taking it know if they have a placebo. All right. So kind of interestingly, it seems like the placebo is a placebo, but also the variable in this case, right? The non-control group, the experimental group is also a placebo. Weird. Okay. So looking at it, they're seeing, okay, maybe if we tell you that you're taking a placebo, there will be a medical benefit. And then we look and we see perhaps this is the case. So we are looking to support that greater well-being in each measure. So being told you were taking a placebo makes you feel better. So where do we see that? Well, we see it here, here, and here. We see it in all three categories, which is what D says. So D is a great answer choice. If you didn't get there, you probably didn't read all your answer choices. But ultimately, D is perfect. It has everything we could want, everything we could need. So we have to go for it. So that's how we answer 13. Okay, so question 14 is a command of evidence textual question. We're being asked to see what supports the idea advanced by these two studyists, okay, these two researchers. So what are they advancing? What is their idea? So they are identifying causality between news finds me and voting, right? So they cannot find, well, actually, they cannot find causality between the two, excuse me, but they can posit that news finds me behavior may reduce voting probability. Okay, so news finds me might reduce your likelihood of voting. However, they could not test this hypothesis because no election took place near the study, right? So which, if true, would support that? Okay, well, the indirect effect might be that news finds me negatively impacts something which typically impacts voting behavior, right? So if voting behavior is influenced by your investment in community and news finds me reduces your investment in community, well, then we could say, there's a connection and it is likely that they will be less likely to vote, okay? So B says that clearly, right? News finds me has a negative effect on political knowledge and interest, which the opposite, right? There's a strong correlation between public political knowledge and the likelihood of voting. So if there's a strong correlation between political knowledge and the likelihood of voting, that means as political knowledge goes up, voting goes up. And if NFM goes up, or excuse me, okay, so now, if NFM goes up, that means that political knowledge goes down. So if political knowledge goes down, voting must also go down, meaning B is correct by way of logic. Okay, this is a logical question. These questions require us to be very logical. All right. The negative correlation between the two initial input or the two initial variables and the positive correlation between the two final variables means that there is a negative correlation between increases or a negative correlation between NFM attitude and voting behavior, most likely. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now, A, we don't know this, okay? We don't know this, and it's an opposite distractor. Now, see this little correlation with political knowledge or political interest? Now, all of a sudden, we know that we cannot include it in this. And then finally, we see this is an opposite distractor, right? If NFM and political knowledge increase together and political knowledge increases the likelihood of voting, well, then D is an opposite distractor, right? So that is how we arrived at B. Okay, so question 15 is an inference question, a logical completion question, and the final reading question of the test in our second module. Ultimately, this word here, therefore, is really important. It means that the sentence before it contains a claim that will be solidified as an effect in the following sentence. So this sentence that we're going to write needs to be referring to this sentence and proving it essentially. So, or being an effect of the cause there. So what we are saying is that while it might be tempting to consider what an essay would be like, how the difference between writing on paper and writing on a typewriter or a computer might be different, there is no way we can actually ascertain that because they are all unique entities with specific circumstances. So there is no ability to have a control group in this setting, apparently, right? So there's no way to reasonably capture or evaluate how the work would be different if they'd been written by other means because there is no way to have a control group, right? See baggage, right? Well, actually kind of the opposite, right? Also, it's not baggage, but also I don't think anyone would think that novels written by hand take less time to do. This is not supported in the passage whatsoever. You might think that that's interesting, but it's not the case, or the passage doesn't clarify that it's the case. And then finally, A is a bit of a baggage distractor, right? You might think that. Why would anyone write it by hand? It's easier to type. However, the unique entity and specific set of circumstances aligns mostly with D, which is how we get to that. And from here, we'll move on to the grammar section, the writing section of test 396, and hopefully the end of the test. Okay, question 16 here on module 2 is a grammar question. It's probably, in my opinion, the easiest question I've ever seen on an SAT. So it's a question. When things are a question, we go ahead and put a question mark. All right. What are atmospherics? What are atmospheric rivers? Excuse me. And how do they affect our weather? Okay, so we don't want an answer choice without a question mark. What are atmospheric rivers and how they do affect our weather? If you miss this question, I mean, you're moving too quickly or something along those lines, simply put. I'm expecting about 100% on this question here because this is the easiest one I've ever seen. So if you miss this question, you are moving way, way too fast on this test. You are not giving the questions enough credit, if you will. Yeah, it's a question. Questions and a question mark. So question 17 here is a modifiers question. All right, so what does that mean? It means that what is modifying, right? So this is the modifier. Okay, so one of the few African-American global explorers during the turn of the 20th century. Okay, this is the modifier, the thing that's being modified or discussed by this, the subject, if you will, that is related to this, the person or whatever is the thing here, needs to be immediately next to it. So whoever is this African-American global explorer needs to be the first thing we see after this comma. Okay, this is a dependent, and then the next will be independent. So it needs to start with the person's name and end in a period. A is the only one that starts with the name, right? Here, who is the explorer? 1891 and 1909. C, who is the explorer? Greenland. D, who is the explorer? Several treks, all right? The only one that clarifies who the explorer is, that has the right arrangement for to demonstrate what who the subject is A. Therefore, we go with it. Question 18, just like question 17, is a modifier placement question. Okay. Ultimately, we need to identify what in our first clause is being discussed, what's the subject of it, and then how, once we discover what it is, how do we construct the sentence so that the subject is the first thing to appear in the second clause, right? So, woven from recycled yarn and hand tufted. Okay, so woven from recycled yarn and hand tufted is the thing, is what's happening to the thing here. Okay, so why I'm getting rid of B right here. The Argentine textile artist Alexandria Kayoglu. She is not woven from recycled yarn, nor is she hand tufted. Yes, she made the art. And yes, this clause on its own sounds fine. Argentine textile artist Alexandra Kayoglu creates topological tapestries that are blah, 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 blah. But she is not woven from recycled yarn. She is not hand tufted. She is not a technique passed down by the artist's Turkish grandmother. She is the artist, right? Here too, D, we are suggesting that she is woven from these things, right? What do we need to say is woven? The tapestries themselves, right? The tapestries are the subject, not the artist, even though the artist is maybe, you identify correctly as being important. The subject is the tapestry. So that's what must go there in this modifiers question. Okay, so question 19, we have a sort of punctuation question, sentence construction question. First things first, make sure you read this word as through and not though. I've encountered students reading it as though, which makes the question more confusing. All right. Ultimately, here we have two independent clauses. Clear glass allows almost all light to pass through. Wax paper, which is translucent, allows only some light to pass through. Okay, so these here are non-essential phrases. Okay, so though they're very interesting and helpful, important to know, they're not essential for the sentence construction. And it is a lot clearer if you get rid of them when you try to figure out what are these two clauses. Clear glass allows all light to pass. Wax paper allows only some light to pass. All right. In that, it's very clear that both of these are independent clauses, meaning they can stand on their own. How do we separate two independent clauses? Well, we can use a semicolon like C, which is why it's correct, or we can use a period or a comma and a fanboys. D is missing a comma, A is missing a fanboys, and B is just a straight run-on. All right. We are not allowing the light to pass through wax paper. We are saying that clear glass allows light to pass through. All right. So slow down if you're missing this one. I think it's relatively straightforward, but it can read naturally. If you're only looking at part of it, you'll see allows all light to pass through wax paper, right? But that's not what we're actually looking to read. Get rid of those non-essential phrases if you're getting stuck on questions like this, so you can focus on what's only essential to the sentence construction. All right, question 20 is a very typical question of this new digital SAT. Here we have a list, but this list is a special list, right? It's a unique form of a list, right? When typically we write lists, each element in the list is just one thing and we separate them by commas, right? I'm going to the grocery store to get lettuce, comma, fruit, comma, cheese, comma, and meat, okay? All of those items in the list just are, one word, but they can even be more words, right? We separate them by commas. But occasionally we have lists where each item in the list requires a comma, okay? Because they're being, typically it's because they're being clarified within the item in the list, okay? So this list could just be using natural debris, not debris, man-made trash, and traditional art supplies, Ghanaian artist, blah, 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 okay? However, because we're clarifying what these things are, what natural debris is, what man-made trash is, and what traditional art supplies are, with these commas, we need to make sure that the beginning of each item of the list is separated by a semicolon. Why we do that is to clarify that we are talking about natural debris, man-made trash, and traditional art supplies as the elements of his art, okay? So each item in that list is separated by a semicolon, okay? This is basically the second role of semicolons. Typically, we separate independent clauses with semicolons, but sometimes we separate items in a list with semicolons. It's really the other role. We want to make sure, though, that we are only separating the actual items in the list. We're not doing what D does, which says that man-made trash and such as plastic bags are each their own element in the list. No, right? So the construction is going to be semicolons between the items, used natural debris, man-made trash, and traditional art supplies, with commas separating the explanations behind them. Okay, so we've got B. All right, question 20 isn't a transitions question, though we're looking at a word that has been used as a transition. Really, this is a question about punctuation and sentence construction. All right, so let me walk you through a few things, okay? We can use colons to introduce lists. All right, this here is a list, but we can only use colons to introduce lists in special situations. We can only do that if what precedes the list could stand on its own as a sentence, right? It has to be an independent clause, which it is. Only 5 of these dances are included in international ballroom dance competitions, however, right? Now, the however does not dangle here, if you will. It doesn't make this it doesn't ruin whether this is a independent clause, right? It is connected to this first sentence here, right? However could have come at the beginning of this sentence, before only, but can also come at the end after competitions, and you could put a period there. Why don't we put a period? Because we're adding an elaboration, right? By adding an elaboration, by giving this list, we are basically explaining what was present in the previous sentence by tacking something on. So this is tacked on. We always do that with a colon or a dash. They use a dash here to do it, in fact. Okay, now, why can we not, however, use a semicolon, which we also use to separate independent clauses? Well, with a semicolon, what comes to the right of the semicolon would also need to be an independent clause. And this is not. Roomba through roots is not an independent clause. With D, we have the however with the wrong part. Okay, however needs to be with the previous clause, previous sentence, because it's referring to that sentence from Latin America to forms. And then finally, we don't embed it within a pair of commas because that suggests everything from only to there is its own independent clause that stands on its own. But it isn't. It's an independent clause up until however. As such, we go with A because our colon produces an elaboration in the form of a list, and however comes at the end of the sentence because it is transitioning from the previous sentence, Latin America to forms. Okay, so for question 22 here, I want to remind us of something that's true on the SAT. The correct answer choice, and the answer choice is there, right? Between all four answer choices offered, there will only ever be one correct answer choice, right? But that doesn't mean that the correct answer choice is the only way we could solve the problem presented to us. But we can know that it's the only offer presented to us that works. The other ones don't work, but there could be like a secret fifth option that would solve the problem. Okay, so for example, looking at this answer choice, or looking at this question with these answer choices, D is the only one that solves the problem. Because what we have here is an independent clause. When it comes to their diets, goats are notoriously indiscriminate. And then another independent clause that also serves as an elaboration. They will devour all kinds of shrubs and weeds, leaving virtually no part of any plant unconsumed. All right, so both of those are independent clauses, but the second independent clause is clarifying or elaborating on the claim made by the first independent clause, which is the word indiscriminate, or how they're indiscriminate. So D works as an elaboration because everything coming before the colon is an independent clause. And that's what clarifies that we can use a colon to create an elaboration, and that what comes after the colon explains something in the first clause. So we could use a colon here because it is an elaboration. But we also could have used a comma and a fanboys. We also could have used a period. We also could have used a semicolon. We could have used a lot of other options. But the options we're presented with don't work. C, indiscriminate, without anything. That's just a total run-on. A, what would we need here? A comma with that fanboys. And is good to have, but it needs the comma. And then B, with just a comma, it is a comma splice. We know it is a comma splice because both of the things are able to stand on their own. So I want us to remember that with D, you do not need what comes after the colon to be an independent clause to use a colon. So long as what comes before the independent clause, or before the colon, excuse me, is an independent clause, you can use a colon. And what comes after it explains something from that independent clause. So we have an elaboration here that just happens to be an independent clause. And that's why we can use a colon, which is why we go with D. All right, 23, we have a transitions question. And I always want to remember to remind you, I always want you to remember that when we're working with transitions questions, we are looking for what category of transition are we putting in the answer, right? We're not going to just take these answer choices and plug them in. Okay, so how do we figure out the category? Well, we look at the rest of it and we see here, we have time or counting, time and counting going through. Time and counting. So after something, we first do this, then we do that, and then finally or later, ending time, we do this. Okay? So we want a time type transition, and this is a time transition. Now, earlier is also a time transition, but isn't it the wrong kind of time transition? Doesn't it mean the wrong thing? Yes, right? It's the wrong, this is next. This is the final thing. All right. For instance doesn't work because it would clarify something that comes before. It's an emphasis. And on the contrary, it's not on the contrary. It's not refuting something. So we go with finally for 23. Okay, so for 24, we have a transitions question. And as I always say with transition questions, we want to think about our category of transition when we are thinking about what answer we want to use. I don't want us just plugging them in. I want us thinking, what kind of transition do we want to put there? So what we want to put is a cause and effect transition. This is the cause. I'm assuming you all read this, and you have to read these in order to get them right. This is the cause. Liquid metals cause the core to circulate. Circulation generates the electrical currents. And then these currents, as a result, create a barrier, or thus, or what have you, right? So in turn is the transition that aligns with the category of as a consequence of the cause and effect. Okay. Likewise is a similarity transition. Nevertheless is a contrary transition. And in reality is also some sort of contrary transition, a pivot kind of transition. So none of those fit the proper context. Only A does in turn, which is why we go with it. Okay, so 25 is a rhetorical synthesis question. With these questions, we really want to just be focused on only the parameter that we are asked about. So what parameter are we asked about here? We are asking to contrast the number of meteorite falls and the number of meteorite finds. So 1,200 falls have been recorded, and there have been 60,000 recorded meteorite finds. Okay, so there's been a lot that are found, but only so many that have been observed before they fell. Okay, so you find a whole bunch of meteorites around, but only a few do you watch that actually come down before you find it. Which of our answer choices only compares falls to finds? Well, A, I don't see a number at all, nor do I in B. C, we have a number, but that only talks about meteorite falls. What's missing? The meteorite finds. A, we have the falls, or D, I'm sorry, we have the falls, and we have the finds, which is why it is correct, okay? Remember, this question is not asking you, what is interesting about these notes? If I had to categorize these notes, I'd probably honestly say something like A, right? That really shows us what the notes are about. That's not what our question is asking. Our question is asking us simply to gives us some numbers, right? Just to compare and contrast those numbers. D is the only one that gives everything we need. All right, so 26 is a rhetorical synthesis question. We want to only focus on what the question actually asks. In this case, we only want to talk about the sample collected from Serra da Itatia, or however you'd pronounce that in Portuguese. And so we go to here and we see that Polychaetum juniperum was found in Serra da Itatia at this era. Okay, so our answer choice has to only talk about this and not talk about the others. Okay, B is the only one that talks about Serra da Itaita. All right, and emphasizes that. Now, C mentions this, right? But we are just only trying to emphasize the one that comes from Serra da Itaita. So B is superior, right? D doesn't give us where it's from. And A summarizes the notes for the most part. So remember, we're only going based off of this. Going based off that solely, we get to B. All right, so question 27 is a rhetorical synthesis question. It's a little bit different from most rhetorical synthesis questions I have seen. It's a little more difficult because we have to do a little bit of interpretation. All right. So, going based off of this, right? Which category most routine diplomatic correspondence belongs in based on how sensitive information is classed? All right. So most routine diplomatic correspondence could cause damage, but not serious damage. All right. So routine diplomatic correspondence, therefore, connects with here, confidential, because this causes damage. Secret is what could cause serious damage. So therefore, most routine diplomatic correspondence would be confidential, all right? Because it would only cause damage. So this answer choice says confidential information could damage national security and mentions routine diplomatic correspondence. But does it connect routine diplomatic correspondence with confidential information? Does it say that one is one? No, right? In fact, you can see if you know a little grammar, by using the word which and having it within a pair of commas, it's not essential to this sentence. So basically, all this says is, according to the US government, confidential information could damage national security. But what we want to say is that routine diplomatic correspondence is confidential, or should be classified as confidential. B just generalizes without saying which of the two it is. And then C says, hey, most routine diplomatic correspondence is classified as confidential. It's the only one that answers the question, right? Now, finally, D says something, but does it say which classification it is? No. So therefore, it's insufficient. So with that, we arrive to C, and we actually finish off the test.